Welcome back. This is In Real Time, the debut edition here on Facebook Live. I'm Costa Maragos. Great to have you on board. Well, there are certainly worries here in Saskatchewan about rising cases of COVID, but what if you lived in a COVID hotspot somewhere in the world? We're continuing our series on this show, connecting with former Saskatchewan residents who are living in areas that have been hit much harder with the pandemic than here in Saskatchewan. And we take you to Lima, Peru, where that country's in a life and death struggle with nearly 500,000 reported cases of COVID-19 and a medical system struggling to keep up. Well, Marleis Weiss is a sixth-year medical student in Lima, Peru. She has spent her life in Peru and Regina, where she graduated from the University of Regina with degrees in anthropology and economics. And she joins us now from Lima, Peru. Hi there, Marleis.
Hi, Costa. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. And thank you for joining us to give us a sense of life in the pandemic world in Peru. But before we get to the interview, you were so kind enough to give us a sense of the city with some video and some commentary from you. So let's take a look at that.
So right now we're on Javier Prado. It's normally quite a busy street, but as you can see, there aren't that many cars. Right now it's close to 9 p.m. For most of our quarantine, the government put a curfew that no one could leave their house after 10 p.m. That's why most people are still used to that curfew. Most businesses close after 8 p.m. and the businesses that are open, which aren't that many, at the entrance have rubbing alcohol for everyone who enters, and most of them check people's temperature as well.
So there you get a sense of what life is like in this COVID crisis in Lima, Peru. Marleis Weiss is from Regina, living in Peru. So Marleis, what's happened to your life since all this broke out back in March?
Well, I stopped going to the hospital because they pulled out all medical students for our safety. So while our education is somewhat on standby, we continue our education online to the extent that we can. So it means spending a lot more time at home with our families and just a different pace and trying to do what we can to continue with our education.
Well, how seriously did the authorities take this COVID when it first really broke out?
They took it very seriously from an early date. On March 16, we were the first country in the region, in Latin America actually, to go into a strict quarantine. So what that meant was that people could only circulate to go to the bank, to go to the grocery store, or to go to the pharmacy. Or if they needed to get a special permit to circulate with their vehicle, they could take care of elderly people. But on the streets, you would not see many people, and there was a strict curfew at 10 p.m.
And when you say strict, what do you mean by strict curfew?
By strict, I mean whenever you do leave your house, you do have to leave with your ID because there could be police or military that could check just to make sure. And when someone would go to the grocery store, it had to be one person per household.
Now, the restrictions, of course, were eased over time, just as they were to a certain extent in Saskatchewan. But so what's happened since then?
Well, since then, we had a strict quarantine until June 31st. Since then, measures changed. However, our numbers kept on increasing. For example, in the first part of quarantine on Sundays, nobody could circulate on the streets. However, now we can circulate on Sundays. However, since the numbers kept on rising and we never reached the peak that would eventually go down, now this strict measure has been reinforced. So right now we can't leave our houses on Sunday either.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, Peru has amongst the highest reported cases of COVID in the world, more than 500,000. How is and you get an interesting perspective here, being a medical student, observing the medical system in Lima. How is the medical system handling these high cases?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, there are social and economic issues that existed before the pandemic. The amount of informality that's in our economy is around 70%, which means a lot of people have to live the day to day. So while the government tries to keep everyone in their houses, a lot of people can't afford to stay in their houses because they have to eat. And a lot of people also don't have refrigerators, or only around 20% of our population has refrigerators, so they can't stock up either. So while the government tries to keep these strict measures enforced, it's difficult for a large part of the population to actually follow them. And then with respect to the medical system, I mean, it's difficult because right now we're at a point where both public and private systems are almost collapsed. There are very few amount of hospital beds available and a smaller amount of ICU beds available. So the situation is quite critical. The doctors do as best they can. They're exhausted, as in other parts of the world. This isn't exclusive to Peru. But in our healthcare system, I think it is particularly difficult.
And how are you feeling about yourself and how safe you are from COVID and being in such a COVID hotspot in the world?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I stay home, I stay safe, and the people I know as well. I have been taking all the precautions that I can. So I feel safe. However, it's very unfortunate what's happening in the country.
What is the worst thing that's happening in the country under COVID right now?
Well, the amount of people that are dying. Even a couple of our teachers have passed away. So the situation is very serious.
A couple of your teachers? What happened?
Well, they were infected by COVID, and unfortunately, they didn't make it.
Oh. Let me ask you if you could, at some point here, cast your eyes to your other home, Regina, Saskatchewan. When you hear about the COVID situation here from where you sit in Lima, Peru, what do you think?
Well, I'm very happy that it seems to be under control. At the beginning, I was quite worried, of course, because my dad and my brother are there, and Regina is a place that is in my heart and always will be. However, I'm glad that the numbers have been low. I heard that recently spike in numbers, but it still seems to be contained.
Certainly compared to Peru, it certainly is. Marleis, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, and we hope to see you back in Regina, at least for a visit someday.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.